Hello, everyone. My name is Tom Sura. I'm an associate professor of English at Hope College, as well as the chair of the AWAC Communications Committee. And I am here today with Dr. Michael Pemberton, Emeritus Professor of English at Georgia Southern University. And we're here today to talk a little bit about Dr. Pemberton's work at IWAC 2025, which took place in July at Colorado State University. So, Dr. Pemberton, just to get started, can you tell us a little bit more about your work in general and your role at Georgia Southern?
Sure. My role at Georgia Southern I was obviously a faculty member in the English department, which was originally called Writing and Linguistics before it merged with the literature department about 5 or 6 years ago. And in addition to teaching courses in the writing and linguistics area and rhetoric and composition, I also directed the Writing Center for the whole time that I was there, which was about 26 years. And before that, I had directed the Writing Center at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign for 9 years before that. So I've been doing Writing Center work for a long, long time, which is how I got started academically and with my published scholarship. But over the years, I began to move more into areas of writing program administration more generally and writing across the curriculum as well. One of the things that I did at the University of Illinois shortly after I started there was I collaborated with Sharon Keyrose, who was at University of Michigan, and we started the first national WAC journal, which at the time was called Language and Learning Across the Disciplines. And I've been involved with that pretty much ever since its inception, which I believe was around, I want to say 2004 was publication of our first issue. And I continued editing that until about 2020, 2021, when I moved away. And currently, I'm the associate publisher for journals at the WAC Clearinghouse. And I've been doing that for a number of years and will continue to do that in my altogether too recent retirement, as you referred to earlier.
Fantastic, fantastic. So, with all of that kind of background, I'm really curious to know more about, and I'm sure for the folks who weren't able to attend IWAC, what's captured your interest recently? What did you present on or talk about at IWAC this year?
Well, it's kind of interesting because when you've been in the field as long as I have, you find that some of your scholarship tends to reflect back on what you've done before. And that is in sum and substance sort of what I did, what I was charged with on the panel that I was on. I was on a panel with Doug Hesse and Pamela Childers, and each of us sort of took quasi-nostalgic, reflective looks at a variety of things we'd been involved in over the years. Pamela, for example, talked about writing across the curriculum in the K through 12 curriculum, which she's been a specialist in. And what I did was I looked at kind of my evolving perspectives on the relationships between writing centers and WAC programs over the years. The way that I framed this in the presentation was I chose 4 pieces that I had written over the course of the better part of 20, 30 years, I guess, starting with a piece that I wrote in 1995 that was called Rethinking the WAC Writing Center Connection. And that was published in a Writing Center journal. And in essence, my perspective on it at the time was I drew on some research by Cheryl Geisler, who had looked at the kinds of writing that was being assigned in upper division courses in a variety of disciplines, in spite of the fact that they had nascent WAC programs. And she discovered, in fact, that most of the writing assignments were relatively generic. They, addressed the modes of writing. They didn't really delve very deeply in WID or disciplinary constructs. So I drew from that and said, well, at least at this point, writing centers don't have to worry about working with specialized papers in upper division courses because we're not likely to see the kinds of genres or subjects that we are not already familiar with. So I think that in the presentation I said, don't worry, be happy, was my conclusion at the end of that article. And then I looked at another forum in academic.writing, which was published a few years later, in which we had a discussion about writing centers and WAC programs, and I essentially advanced the same point of view. But in 2018, I published a piece that was called rethinking the WAC Writing Center graduate student connection. And it was an attempt to sort of expand what I had done before and say, at the time that I wrote that original article, there really was no research into specialized discourse and writing centers working with graduate students. But in the fact that many, many more writing centers are now developing specialized graduate centers and working with graduate students more, it took my previous finding about not having to worry about it and changed it and said, you know, now we do kind of have to worry about it because we're working with students who are writing in areas in which we do not have any demonstrated expertise necessarily. So it took a more collaborative perspective and point of view, modified from my original position. And then my presentation at IWAC was sort of looking back at all of these pieces and how my opinions had changed. And I said that the title of this presentation should have been Rethinking the WAC Writing Center Connection, because it's something that I just keep revisiting over time. And I actually think that that's one of the fascinating things about our discipline and our area, not just WAC, but Rhet Comp in general, is that if you're doing it for a long time, you find that some of the positions that you stake out for yourself in advance don't necessarily hold water over an extended period of time because things change. And the last part of the presentation that all of us did, we were asked to do in terms of our various subject areas, was to talk about what's the future going to be like, you know, make a prediction about where it's going to go. And in my presentation, I essentially said, well, I'm of two minds of this. I have a utopian vision and I have a dystopian vision. And right now we're living in dystopian times, so it's hard not to see tragedy and horror and zombies at every turn. But I said that in spite of that, I think that there are some room for optimism. And I'll just mention one of the points that I made, which is that if universities and post-secondary educational institutions are becoming more and more corporatized, then one of the things that business and corporate leaders know is that communication skills and writing is one of the most valuable skills that their employees can have, especially new employees who are coming right out of school, undergraduate or graduate. So in that regard, it seems to perhaps paint a more rosy picture about the future possibilities for both writing centers and for WAC programs. The reasons may be different, but the results would be the same.
Okay. So as you're talking, I have a follow-up question to that I'm really curious about, given the depth of your work in writing centers and kind of looking out to the future. I'm wondering what you think about the question of for anybody out there who is working on training writing center tutors, right? How do you see them, or what do you think might be important for them in terms of preparing writing center tutors or writing assistants or writing consultants to know or be able to do, or even mindsets related to AI and the kind of the future that you see? What do the writing center tutors need as part of their development, do you think?
Well, that's certainly a question that's been addressed for the 30 plus years that I've been involved with writing centers. And I think one of the things that's important, and I try to stress this, and I always have, this is one training perspective that I think holds a lot of water. I think that it makes a lot of sense, which is that even if you're not a disciplinary expert in the field that is being written about in the paper that you're working with, there is nevertheless a tremendous value in what's called a naive reader's perspective. And that being that someone who is completely outside of the discipline can sometimes point out places where there seems to be a little bit of confusion, where the explanation is not necessarily clear or cogent, or where transitions, for example, between points seem to be a little bit unusual or awkward. And what that does is at least opens up the possibility that the person who wrote the paper and who is invested in that discipline can bring their expertise to the session and say, no, in my discipline, this is sort of the way we organize things, or that's a good question. Do you think that I should explain that? Do you think that I should say more about that? So it's not necessarily contingent upon being an expert in the disciplinary field to determine whether or not you have a successful conference, but it's someone who's willing to be a good listener and someone who's willing to learn at the same time that they're trying to help the person with the writing that they're working on that paper. So that's certainly one thing that I would say, but I also think that it is incumbent upon people who are training tutors to at least expose them to a variety of different genre expectations for things like lab reports and history papers and economics papers, so that they don't come at it completely cold, even if they're not experts, but they have enough familiarity with it to recognize some of the genre expectations that they can then bring to discussions of the paper.
That's fantastic. Dr. Pemberton, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing your wisdom on these issues and telling us a little bit more about what you were able to share at IWAC. I really appreciate it. So for everyone watching, don't forget to do the things you do on social media, like, subscribe, otherwise let us know how helpful these videos are. And for more information about the Association for Writing Across the Curriculum, go online to WAC Association, that's WAC Association.org. Thank you so much. And thanks again, Dr. Pemberton.
Thanks, it was a pleasure.